Thank you very much. Do we need mics in here? Yes, we do. Yeah, okay. So, welcome to our event on market transformation activation, the journey to the Paris Forum in 2024. I'm Roland Hansiker. I'm the Director Built Environment at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I'll be your host for this session, and I'll just kick us off with a very brief introduction. And I'm accompanied by Yves-Laurent Sapoval, who works with the French Ministry for Ecological Transition and is my fellow co-chair in the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction since quite a few years, since almost the launch back in 2015. So thank you very much, Yves-Laurent, also for being here and talking to us a bit about the forum in particular. We will then go into two parts with discussion, and I will introduce our speakers and facilitators. So expect a lot of discussion, debate, and we also hope to involve you all. So each facilitator will also open up so that we can have a real discussion, and that's why it's set up in a way that we're not too far from each other and we can really discuss. So very briefly, the built environment, we know the numbers, 40% of global CO2 emissions in this sector. We are not on track. We have the numbers out here, the newest numbers from the Global Status Report. And that is because we are fragmented and also regulations are not pushing us yet to where we need to go. The Market Transformation Initiative is all about bringing us together, all actors along the value chain, and to overcome the barriers that keep us back. So understanding the barriers and developing the collective actions that are needed. And the goal is that we halve emissions by 2030. That is increasingly challenging, we know it, but unless we put that in our goals today, because building projects take many, many years to come to fruition, then we will not manage. So we really have to start that today, and we need to fully decarbonize by 2050, meaning all emissions, be that material extraction to construction to end use, all emissions need to get to zero. We presented the original market transformation levers 2 years ago at COP26 in Glasgow, and they talked about the need for a common vision. So this goal, we all need to work on it, and we need to have radical and deep collaboration of all stakeholders. And we need to focus on three things, all of us. To look at all emissions in building projects, so whole life carbon is what we talk about in our dream these days, at least Luca and I, so that we really understand all the emissions and we can drive them down to zero. We need to start looking at carbon as we look at cost. We should not build anymore without knowing all the carbon that is in buildings. And also then we need to change the supply and demand relationships. So this is a brief visual. I will not go into detail, but we have now worked this year on really what are the actions, the collective actions that we all need to take individually as companies, but then most importantly together along the value chain and with all the initiatives that are working on this to overcome our own fragmentation. And we'd like to align this with the Buildings Breakthrough, which is coming as a government initiative. And I will now hand over to Yves-Laurent to tell us more about this work, closely aligned under the Global Alliance for Buildings, where the Buildings Breakthrough will be hosted, and also obviously then with the Global Forum in March of next year. So Yves-Laurent, with that, I would like to ask you, what is the Buildings Breakthrough actually? And what are your expectations also from this group, especially from private sector, as we go to the forum next year?
Okay, I was just...
You don't need to come this close.
No, it was...
I know, we know each other very well.
I saw you were worried about that, but... no, it's just... Okay. Okay, so you're all buildings people, I guess, so I don't go through the figures anymore, half the global wealth, etc. You know that. You know how many jobs involved, you know how many people, you know how that. So you are convinced already. The question is, how do we convince the others? And how do we make progress? First people to convince is governments. That's what we think. We think that regulation governments Regulation is the main driver, and this is one of the first lessons that we heard from the private sector. We were surprised to be true, because as a government, we always have the private sector complaining about too many regulations, it's too many regulations. We cannot build properly because and suddenly the private sector says, but to adapt, to see the way, to see the goal, long-term goal, we need to invest. And we need to invest properly in the right way. And only governments can show the way of what will be regulations in 10 years, in 20 years. So if there's not a firm attitude from governments, if it's not clear enough, we cannot invest the enormous amount of investment we have to do. And then basically we cannot evaluate globally. On the other hand, the governments, they say, will they be able to deliver? Will they be, how do we collectively create this demand? How do we collectively make this acceptable? How do we make this not too expensive? How do we make this technically feasible? So we have these two, and it's not it's not the only people that are involved. We have financial sectors. Financial sector, they say we can lend some money, but to whom, which conditions? Can someone certify that this building is climate compatible? For example, in Nigeria, in Kenya, what is a climate compatible building in a place where there is no building codes, for example? So one depending on another, this value change is not. I mean, we are always talking about the building sector, but is there a building sector? I mean, how does this building sector exist properly? Does it exist? I mean, I see architects, I see banks, I see providers, I see, I see me buying a house. What is this? And using a house? What is this building sector? So, how do we collectively evaluate when there's no common sense, when there's not really something in common? That's what we've been trying to do with Global ABC, gathering everybody at COP and saying, okay, let's talk together, let's try to evaluate together, let's try to have all the sectors, all the scattered, all the stakeholders of this scattered sector working together and going further. So we've been working with Roland, with others, and we've been delivering this global stage report. I hope each year you are waiting for the global stage report of Global ABC, like Christmas for Christmas. It's free, you can offer it. It's even to the people you don't like. Okay, so anyway, and this global stage report shows what we are not on track, and it doesn't go the right way, to be true, because we are making progress in terms of energy efficiency, but the build era is growing so fast that it's not going the right way. So what could we do? We wanted to give another impulsion on the government side. So we called for a buildings breakthrough. You are familiar with the breakthroughs, I imagine. And there was typically, as there's no building sector, there was no buildings breakthrough. It's not like steel or cement or even. So we called last year for a buildings breakthrough with, I think, 15 other countries. And this year we are more than 27 at this. We are launching the breakthrough on the 6th of December. Please come, because I think they put us in the presidency room. There's 1,000-person chairs, not persons, chairs. So that's the problem. Okay. So please come with friends. And there will be 27 or 28 countries. I don't know. We have recently China and USA, which is, every country is important, but in terms of heavy weight, obviously it was important to have them. We're waiting for India to come. Then we would have the three and many other countries that wants to work together. The breakthrough is an initiative of intergovernmental cooperation. And so there are 5 thematics, 5 tracks on which to work, and we will be beginning to work on those tracks with the support of initiatives. Typically, some of yours in the room, initiatives supporting, I think there's 17 also initiatives supporting, if I remember well. And so it's an ongoing process. It's work to be done. It's how do we work together towards this objective of having it's near zero and resilient building to be the new normal by 2030, which is obviously quite ambitious. The ambition is to work together towards this. So this is to us, this is a main impulsion. I mean, we hope that it will be very powerful and it will develop in the further years. But also, our minister, Christophe Béchu, decided that it was not enough. I mean, to gather 25 countries is good, but we wanted to gather more, and we wanted to organize for the first time the first meeting at the global level of ministers in charge of construction, which never happened. As incredible as it may seem, there's energy meetings, there's cities meetings, there's lots of people meeting, but buildings never. And buildings is always a side, you know? You go to people discussing cities, they discuss transportation, mobilities, public spaces, but never buildings. That's quite weird. I mean, the city, a city, the first thing you think is it's made out of buildings, but they never talk about building. Energy is the same. You have energy, same MI, you have lots of energy meetings, and it's very good. IEA, lots of very good work, but buildings is a side, energy efficiency in buildings is a side. Finance, the same. Obviously, finance, I mean, buildings is a heavyweight on finance, but they never discuss, they discuss financing infrastructure, but building is not an infrastructure for some reason. And so, okay, so we wanted to have everybody together and to make the case really for building. So this is, we hope it won't be the only opportunity, but we consider it the only opportunity to really make progress on this question. So we will have, it's on 7th and 8th of March. We will have one day of mostly ministerial, open to everybody. I mean, it's not everybody. We want a high-level meeting, so it's about 800 people from all around, significant people, and it's not everybody significant, but I mean. Okay, don't tell that to my children. I will deny. And the day before, on the 7th, we will have stakeholders meeting and sessions on specific topics. And on these sessions, we want to get engagements from people. I don't know what we will succeed in getting in terms of engagement. I always give this example that is, in the meantime, very simple to think of and incredibly complicated to implement. If, for example, the development bank were able to say, we will not finance anymore brown buildings, it can be incredible. I mean, this is incredibly difficult to implement. And it's not, I mean, it's not because they don't want, everybody wants to do this, but it's not, I mean, some way it doesn't work. So it's this kind of engagement, hopefully, I don't know what we will succeed in. And this is where we come to you. We need stakeholders, we need private sector, we need CEOs coming to make the case, and we need engagement of feasibility, of engagement from the private sector, all gathering, also to say to the ministers, we can do it, we are doing it, we want to go further, we need you to go further, and we can do such and such, and that's it. So this is very much what we're trying to do on the Paris Forum. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Yves Laurent, for setting the scene for us. I think this really frames our discussion as well today. And you said it rightly, you don't know exactly what could be such announcements or commitments everybody makes, but I think we have here also time today, but also the next days, to maybe discuss that. There's a big event on the next Wednesday, and I think we have time. Because, again, we will now hear from people from the private sector side and from many initiatives. There is a lot of work is happening, but I think we still need to come together, and we really have an opportunity here for doing that. So thank you very much for helping us get started, Yves Laurent. He will stay with us, of course, but we will now make space for our first panel. So Eva, I'm very pleased to welcome you. Eva Hinkers, you're the CEO of Europe for Arup, global engineering and design consultancy firm, and I will ask you to introduce our first round of panelists, if that's okay with you. Thank you.
So yeah, I do that standing so that I can see the screen. So yeah, you talked about, well, first of all, Roland, thank you, and Jean-Charles. You talked about overcoming fragmentation in the built environment. So I'm very pleased that we have panelists that really go across the whole life cycle of buildings, other than finance. We've got all represented here. So very pleased to have Flemming Voetman here, Vice President, External Relationships and Sustainable Development from Velux. So welcome, Flemming, if you want to come and join me here. Then Lena Höck, Executive Vice President, Sustainability and Innovation from Skanska. Hi, Lena. And we have Jill Vermont-Desroches, Chief Citizenship and Institutional Affairs Officer from Schneider Electric. Welcome, Jill. So now that we've introduced ourselves, all of our organizations have been part of the market transformation workshops. And oh, Luca, if you could put up the slide with 11 actions, if that's possible, that'd be great. Oh, there they are. Yeah, that's perfect. So we have all provided input into those actions and have been part of many of the workshops that have happened. So my question to you would be what it meant to you, your organizations, to be part of this process, and what are you currently focused on when it comes to those actions. And maybe I start with Arup just to set the scene. So where we are focused is on Lever 1, which is all about whole life carbon assessment, which is a commitment that we made 2 years ago at COP when you introduced this agenda. And we committed to assessing whole life carbon on our buildings projects, which we have done since then. And where we're now is we've developed an international platform which is gathering the data, and we've assessed around 1,400 buildings across 50 countries. And we are publicizing and sharing that data because I think that's really important so that we all learn from each other and that we also motivate others to come with us on that journey. And we have also published 2, I think, really important publications. One is around defining what net zero really means and how we can halve emissions on embodied carbon. And we've done that together with WBCSD. So these are really important publications to harmonize our approach and to harmonize definitions of what are we really talking about so that we are comparing apples and apples. So that was our focus. Can I hand over to you, Lena, to talk about what Skanska has done and where the focus for you has been?
Yes, thank you. So important coming together in the industry, and Skanska doing both project development as well as construction. To us, we are part of seeing the whole value chain, so to speak. So especially important to us that we can have a common direction. So we have set forth our climate target, and it's science-based verified as well. And once you have set forth the target, then you also know what to focus on and what actions to take, but also the need to follow up your performance. Both, of course, when you are doing your planning, but also when you're having your actions and afterwards seeing how much did you reach. So far, when it comes to our own carbon emissions, we have reduced with 58%. So that's driving the transformation towards electrification, when it comes to green energy, as well as more efficiency when it comes to using energy. But of course, most important to us are the emissions in scope 3, that being materials as well as the energy in the buildings that we do develop. So just to take one example then of and building on what you said, Eva, regarding the importance of data. We did find out, once we have set our climate target, we realized how hard it was for us to follow up in the US, because there were no database on the scope 3 and the materials, the embodied carbon. So that meant that we took knowledge from our Swedish and Nordic employees and actually transferred that knowledge to our US colleagues that collaborated together with partners to develop actually a database. We call it embodied carbon in construction calculators. It's a database and it is a calculator. And we poured in some 1,000 environmental product declarations, EPDs. We thought that was mighty much. And then we made it open. So you're just laughing from out of desk. But we thought that was mighty much. And we made it open source because we realized we can't sit on this alone. And foremost, we need others to contribute. And the best way to do that is also to have others to use it. So making it open source, anyone can use a calculator, anyone can use a database, but you also need to pitch in. To date has 168,000 EPDs. I dare to say that it's quite major tool being used in the US. And to us, of course, it's quite convenient to have an open source tool that also the small and medium-sized suppliers and partners within our value chain can freely use. And of course, also for us, it's quite convenient since we set it up from the knowledge of the Nordics. It actually follows the same standards and the same way and the same logic as we are having here in Europe. And that's a treat, I have to say. So by that, going over also to the importance of actually aligning standardization, because if we are having different yardsticks, it's going to be mighty hard to be able to compare and to know what good looks like.
Very good. I think that's a really nice example of how international companies can bring practice from one location to another, and then the sharing, the generosity of making it accessible for others is really good. So, Jill, over to you. So, where's your focus currently when it comes to those 11 activities?
Thank you. Yes. No, thank you. It's perfect. I'm in Schneider Electric. For me, it's interesting because, in general, when we are speaking about building and the different actors of building, Schneider Electric perhaps, but just the last actors, because we are here to provide electrical distribution to be sure that you are safe when you use your building. And if that is the only question that Schneider Electric face, I'm not sure that I'm relevant in this discussion. But I'm relevant in this discussion, I think, with the Schneider Electric solutions for two reasons. The first, and I would like to begin by the full picture of the future. I think for me it's better to go from this, not a dream, from this reality that we will face in 10 years, 20 years sometimes, than to ask where we are now and to organize the perspective. In 20 years, in 10 years, it depends on the geography. The building will be a part of a larger whole. Not the end of the story. In a linear mode, we produce energy somewhere, we transport. At the end, we have the building. Tomorrow, the building will produce energy differently. Linked to the geography, with wind, with solar, with biomass, with different things. In the building level, certainly not enough, then the building will be in a grid, local or global grid. The car will be in the building and the car will be electric, and sometimes will be the backup of the grid in the building. But the building could be the backup for the car, for the rest of the city, and so on. And we need to think the building in this manner. It's not the consequence of the future. It's because tomorrow the building, all the building together, will make this role in the city, will make this role in the energy transition to reduce carbon emission, to produce less, to produce in local manner, to be each of us self-consumer. It's true for many things, and tomorrow, today, the people would like to do that with energy. And very often, when they would like to do that with energy, they put solar panel on the roof of their own building, or if it's a company with a project to become a net zero emission company, one of the first big action is to see all the office building of the company to know how we can produce differently energy, reduce energy, and plus, with the last year, we have a new reality, which is to add energy efficiency solutions and the need of sufficiency. Because in the past, certainly, the people who are the provider of energy efficiency, Schneider Electric, for example, we were only speaking about energy efficiency. Okay, we put in your building a very relevant solution for energy management, especially office building or schools or hospital and so on. And with that, you will know a lot of things. You can manage your energy, be safer. But it's not enough to consume less. To consume less, I'll have to decide to stop air conditioning when it's not necessary, or in winter to reduce the level of temperature. Then we need both. We need to have the commitment and to have the tools for the commitment. Then a company like Schneider Electric, and we're competitors too, we are here in the building to understand not only the beginning and the end of the building, and very often when we are speaking about building and carbon emission, we are speaking about these two edges of the building, but to have a vision about the life of the building, and to have the vision about the people who live in the building, and to take care of these people, to make sensitive see people, and to give to these people the tools to live differently the building. At home, in the office, in the plan where we are. It's a position of Schneider Electric today and for the future. The second position for me, we need to strategize energy consumption in the building. It's a question of data. I fully agree with you. We could have the data of everything in the building. When you consume or when you don't consume, where you are here, where you don't are here. But we need to consider that it's not only information or topic for facility management. It's something that we have to strategize in order to have a clear vision about how do we use the building. When we are in an office now, we are speaking about teletravail in English.
Work environment?
Flexible working.
Flexible working and so on. And all these topics, all these topics are key for the future. But not only at the end to have the measurement, to know, okay, is that, but just to strategize, to be sure that we have the relevant data. And last but not least, but if we want to progress, we need to measure. Then we need to have the data. Now the solution, thanks to shift to electricity, it's much better to manage a building with electricity than the other source of energy, and it's better for carbon too. And secondly, with this information, with the data, we can measure to have goals. Not only to know what's happened, but to be able to be responsible manager of leader about the next years. It's why these two big revolutions, the building in the city, a very efficient part to the next energy landscape, and secondly, a smart manner to strategize the manner to consume in the building, both together will be a huge progress to reduce the carbon emission in the building, energy consumption, and to increase the fact that the building is good to have a better life in the building. It's not only something to reduce, but we can see that if we manage very well the building, we can use in a better manner and to reduce energy consumption and carbon emission.
Thank you very much, Jill, for sharing that vision of the electric city, the system change, and the importance of digitalization. So Fleming, over to you. Velux, what's your focus?
Thank you very much. And first off, thank you to Roland and to Yves Laurent for your leadership in this. This is extremely important. It is also very much appreciated that you continue to lead all of this work. It's truly helpful. We're a one product company that sells two things that are not here today, daylight and ventilation, which are sort of, you could say, fairly important ingredients when you talk about sustainable buildings. And since we sell daylight and ventilation, is of course because we're the world's largest manufacturers of roof windows, skylights, sun tunnels, and other things that hopefully give you a lot of daylight and also really nice ventilation, and thereby also often actually sometimes not necessarily reduce, but maybe minimize the need also for air conditioning in a world that is increasingly warming. So that's part of our DNA. We've been around for 81 years, so we have a lot of experience in this. So a few things based on what you see here and some of the takeaways and why we're extremely happy about being part of the alliance. One thing is that our founder, he had a firm belief, and sometimes you need to experiment. You got to lead the way by sometimes you need to pilot certain things. So even though we're a one product company, we have a long history of actually doing pilot projects. And we done one that we opened a little bit earlier this year in Copenhagen. It's called Living Places. And it was an experiment where we kind of told our own team, some smart architects and some smart engineers, if you want to build a one-family home, how low can you go in terms of carbon emissions if you're only allowed to use existing materials, and it's got to be affordable. And with affordable, it's got to cost, what would it cost if you buy a prefabricated house, right? And the numbers is pretty simple. The number is 3.8. And what is 3.8? So that's coming back to the whole life principle, right? So that is the entire emissions per square meter for the full lifetime of the building per year. And that might seem very, very complicated. In reality, it's not super complicated. But 3.8, you might also ask yourself, is that a small number? Is that a big number? What is that something we should be interested in? 3.8. I can tell you that the future regulation in Denmark, and I know we're a very small country, just about the size of a Carrefour, but still, the future regulation in Denmark, not today, future regulation is 10. So it's 10 CO2 equivalent per square meter. So we produce today existing materials, affordable. Everyone can go out and buy all the materials. Don't have to be a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk to afford this one. 3.8, future regulation is 10. So that was back to your point also, Yves. We need the governments on board, because even in a country as Denmark that is so rich, in its own self-perception, very progressive, how can future regulation be more than double of what we build today, and everyone can come to Copenhagen and see we actually built 2 of these houses? That doesn't really make sense. So the Danish parliament, of course, slightly embarrassed by this or encouraged by this, depending on your perspective, now discuss that the future regulation in Denmark should not be 10, but it should be 5. And that makes a whole lot of sense, right? Because it used to be the regulation were challenging us in the industry to up our game. Now it's the other way around, and we really need to change that. I'm extremely old, and I grew up in the countryside where things were very simple, but I've been around enough to see a few things that did work. One thing, of course, was the first Montreal Protocol, that we phased out everything that was the ozone-depleting substances. That worked. Everybody in the industry says, no, it can't be done. It happened within 6 years, right? Another thing that has worked tremendously well, of course, is the energy label in the EU. Everyone was complaining about it. No, we don't want this, yada, 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 from the industry. It took 10 years, and after 10 years, it was impossible to buy an energy inefficient white good in Europe. I mean, you have to go on eBay or something like that if you want to buy something that is energy inefficient, right? So it's completely changed that because there was an EU energy label. So how come we end up in these strange positions where the politicians have lost their courage and the ambition level to challenge us in the industry? Now we are sitting here as the more progressive part of the building environment, begging the politicians to do regulation that just at least is up to the standard of what we can do technological today. And the reason for that, of course, is that if we don't do that, then Schneider Electric, Skanska, and us, we're put at a disadvantage, right? By all those who do things that is substandard materials and stuff that we wouldn't even allow in the 80s. So of course, we also do it because it's in our own interest, right? So we really, and that's why I'm really looking forward to the conference also in March, and of course being here to have that dialogue, because we gotta push the boundaries on that. It really, really does. We can do so much more with existing technology and at the cost. And that's the other thing that we really need to challenge, that sustainable buildings, energy efficient buildings, that somehow they should be more expensive. It's actually the other way around. And we know that. But of course, we've done a pretty bad job of convincing the politicians of that. And of course, there you can take the finger points back at ourselves, right? So that's where we collectively also need to up our game. Just the last thing I just wanted to mention is that we also have science-based targets. We are near zero within the blink of a second for scope 1 and 2. And that means in the blink of a second it's in the lifespan of humanity. So that means within 3 years we'll be zero on scope 1 and 2. And then the last piece over here is that we went out to all of our suppliers and asked them to adhere to the same principles. And we also have an ownership and a leadership that says we're also willing to pay a premium for anything that's low carbon. So we started out with the biggest emitters in the windows, that's aluminium, then is steel. And we have formed 3 partnerships there with suppliers, Norsk Hydro, Novelis, and ArcelorMittal. We're buying low carbon. We pay a premium because we're convinced somebody got to take that first step, because they are massive industries and we got to help them. But the only way you can transform aluminium steel is there's got to be an off-take that means that they can go out and do projects that are bankable. Otherwise, this will never, ever happen. So we've done it with aluminium and steel, and we're desperately looking for anyone with glass, which is our biggest pain point these days. It's very carbon intensive, and we don't see a whole lot of it in the volumes that we would like to buy, but that's what we want to do. So we're super committed to doing this. We're also willing to pay for it, for hopefully then paving the way, to try and drive this. But I think, we do everything we can to align with the principles here, and we're super happy to be part of the alliance. Thank you.
Flemming, thank you so much for that example. That really, I think, really powerful example. What for me is circular economy, keeping materials in use. So that was really great. And then this really passionate, strong call for policies to create the level playing field for the industry, which is then not just reliant on, the brave leading companies, but really bringing the whole industry along, which is what we need, So we need the leaders, but we need the policies so that the whole industry is being brought along on the journey. So thank you for that. It was really, really powerful. So I think I jumped directly to asking, what is success going to look like in 2 years' time, and how will we know that we've been successful with this agenda? I keep it very brief. There are 2 things for me. One is harmonization of how we go about whole life carbon assessments, that we're really comparing like with like, and the definition of what we mean by net zero. But also through that, I think what they will also enable, if we do that consistently on all of our work, it will lead to the lever 2. When you measure everything, it will automatically lead to carbon becoming a currency equal to money. And so that, I think if we can achieve that in 2 years' time, we're pretty damn good. But that's what we'll be working on. So, Lena, can I start with you?
Yes. So success then, what does success look like? I would say, just like we have been talking about here regarding, we can raise expectations of what a building can do. It's so much more than an office or somewhere to stay during days or rest at night. It is actually something that can produce energy to a surplus. And to Skanska, we set forth to a new concept and drove innovation when it comes to energy plus buildings. We call the concept powerhouse. And that means we are using geothermal solutions, we're using solar, and we are actually producing more energy than what's needed. And by that, we can actually charge electric vehicles. We can also power up other houses. We can give back to grid, as well as we could storage. So we are working with all of those kinds of solutions and tried it out in retrofitted buildings, in residential, in commercial offices. So we know we can do that, and by chance, we have actually made all of these buildings in Norway. Don't ask me why, because actually that's a really hard spot on the earth trying to make a proof point of a concept like this. But since we have made all of these buildings of powerhouses in Norway, we can say it works. So if it works there, it should work everywhere. So coming to my point here, what does success look like? I would wish for these kinds of more visionary, highly technological, but also cutting-edge buildings not to be the cutting edge, to actually be what's new normal look like. And therefore, I would urge the demand side, both from private companies as well as from public procurement, to start to actually step up their game when it comes to sustainability requirements for the built environment. And that goes for buildings, it goes for infrastructures equally. So when we come back here, 2 years' time, saying that's a new normal. We got it in public procurement and in private procurement.
Sounds great, Lena. Thank you. Jill.
Thank you to two different levels for Schneider Electric. Our last building in Grenoble in France, close to Norway weather, in France. It's a positive building, but not far from what we can sell to the others. The goal is to implement common solutions, committed solutions, but that we can organize at a showcase for the other. It's not to express we have this building, but nobody could have the same building. It's a building that we can replicate in the manner to build and in the manner to organize the building to use with our colleagues. And we would like to have the same time of building at the worldwide level, but that is the last achievement last year. Just is linked to that, but it's a little different. I could speak about the carbon footprint of Schneider Electric in order to reduce the carbon footprint of our product. One of our 10 main achievements for the end of 2025, it's to support between 2020 and 2025 our 10,000 first suppliers to reduce by 50%, their own carbon emission. In the carbon footprint of Schneider Electric, our own scope 1, scope 2, it's close to 15%. But we would like to be very involved upstream, especially with our main suppliers. And at the beginning of 2020, the end will be 2025, we would like to reduce by 50% the carbon emission of our supply chain. And just now, at the end of 2023, we are at 34%, not two-thirds of the way, but close to two-thirds is not nothing, because we know that we have to open the discussion with suppliers to discuss the best manner. And I think it's a good manner. It's a learning expedition for us too, because there are our suppliers, but in the same time they are industrial, they are building, and we work with them to obtain these results. That it's and last but not least, we continue to put on the market new solutions, and you can see we need to use the solutions that we have today because they are relevant. But if we would like in the 10 next year have better solutions, we need to continue to invest, because we are not at the end of the way. It's only a beginning of this vision. But it's not possible to say when we have iPhone 1 to say, no, I don't want to use iPhone 1. That will be better with iPhone 10. Today we have solutions from today. We learn a lot. Clients, suppliers, people able to install, and it's a key topic. And we are, last but not least, we are very involved in training, because certainly in our field, in our value chain, the weakness today is the doer, the people able, building by building, to implement new solutions, such type of smart solutions. And everywhere we need to have more people. It's why we need to be very involved, public and private sector, to increase and organize upscaling of electricians and new people to contribute of that.
Thank you, Jill. Fleming, over to you.
Yeah, so you can say two things that should happen. I think one thing is that we as an industry sort of collectively need to up our game on recycling. I mean, we are really the black sheep of the global industries when it comes to waste materials, right? Just all the things that ends up in a landfill or is downcycled one way or the other, right? So I think we collectively really need to figure that one out. And I'm glad to see France, for instance, is leading the way and more collectively is organizing take-back schemes for the entire built environment. Other countries have chosen different paths, and some countries have not chosen any path at all. And that's a disaster, right? It's enormous amount of materials. But it also points back to what you have behind under Scope 3. So we've done all the number crunching, right? The only way we can ever achieve our Scope 3 numbers, which is we want to cut it in half by the end of this decade, is that we increase the recycled content in everything we buy. And if we don't help, as an industry, all of our suppliers to get more recycled material back, then they cannot deliver what we ask of them. So, here we definitely have, very well-aligned interest in making sure that we in the built environment actually up our game on taking back materials and supporting that entire ecosystem, right? We are running a small pilot where we take back 6,000 windows a year. What could be in scope is maybe 1 million windows. The people that we work with in this space, this says either we go from 6,000 to 0 or to 100,000, because it doesn't really make any sense economically to run a pilot, right? And of course we learn from the pilot, but then either you decide to go to 0 or you have to go really big scale. And it's those things that we need to do collectively, but that is not our culture and our DNA. That is to sell new things, to be brutally honest. And that we really need to change that culture ASAP. And that's not so much about the physical world. Of course, there's a physical world, but it's actually more about the culture of how we do things. The last thing that I think we need to do also, and that is that how do we sort of rein in the politicians' kid, is the affordability issue. Wherever I go, you hear politicians saying, yeah, we like this and this and this and this, but it's going to be too expensive. We don't want this. The citizens don't want it, right? We've seen that in many countries, in Europe and elsewhere, right? That there's a huge backlash against everything that we're discussing here because people are working under this false notion that this is going to be extremely expensive. It's going to be very expensive if we don't do this. Why in Europe, for instance, would we every winter now write a big check to people to help them offset energy, cost and heating bills, rather than actually give them a check to renovate their building, which then will future-proof the buildings and get people off an addiction of imported gas from Russia. But instead we write them a check. That's the wrong way of going about it. And then we also need an honest discussion about this, because what is up here is affordable and is future-proofing. But this is not where the politicians are going. And we got to work with them to sort of make sure that that happens. So that is my wish for the next 24 months.
Great, and the role that carbon pricing can play if the price gets high enough, yeah. Okay, I don't know, do we have time for a question? I guess 2 minutes. So if there is a question, in the back.
Hi. Hi, Smith Mordack, UK GBC, Green Building Council. Vilux, thank you. Welcome to UK GBC. You signed up this week, so I just want to say that. No, I can't remember who said it now, but somebody talked about buildings as infrastructure. And I was wondering, what are they now? A product, a financial asset class? If they were infrastructure, how would things be different, and how would that kind of enable some of these solutions to come into play?
Jill, I think you talked about buildings being infrastructure and the way they connect it then with the rest of the system. Do you want to respond to that?
I'm not sure that I have. I'm not sure that I'm able to answer in a smart manner. Sure, the regulation will be different, sure, the reality will be different. But certainly about this topic, the reality will be before the regulation. Because it's a question of innovation, and just we see that in many countries without a high level of regulation. The people, I have an example. Schneider Electric is very involved in impact fund to support in developing country many new startups. One of them, the name is Okra. It's in Southeast Asia and in Africa, I don't remember, in Rwanda, I think. Okra is very simple. It's many households in a village have a solar home system. And Okra organizes a system between all these households to organize the mini-grid and to use electricity that you have in the battery of your neighbors, but just enough, not a lot, and so on. And at the end, you pay the bill to only one of your neighbors, and so on. It's a digital, very new system for a new mini-grid without infrastructure. The name is Mesh Grid. We don't use very often this name. And certainly, when we see this innovation, we will use not only in such type of reality, a poor village in the middle of nowhere in Africa, but when we see this technology, we can consider that it's very, very relevant between buildings, between people in the same building. Regulation, I don't know, but because I'm a technological company, I think technology will change a life before regulation.
Thank you, Jill. I think, Lena, do you wanted to add a few words, but then we need to come to an end. So
I just love the philosophical question, so kudos for that. And to many, of course, a building is iconic, or it's a home, or it's a place that actually the hospital where your child was born, or for a company it can be the place that you dread to go to a Monday morning because you always get a headache there, or it could be this fantastic place full with joy and visionary conversations with your colleagues and good air and good quality of actually the built environment adding on to how you feel. And to some it is an asset, and that's really important too, because buildings do need to be tended to, invested in, and made sure that they are upkept and taken care of, because they are also a great technological system. But equally important is that buildings are part of an ecosystem, and that's a system of where we live our lives, society. So we need to think about also how do those buildings actually safeguard the way of life, and I'm talking about resiliency and climate adaptation, unfortunately, including not just technical solutions, nature-based solutions. How do we invite nature into the built environment, into our cities, the biodiversity, as well as urban forestry, or for that part, also urban farming. All of that being a part of an ecosystem where we should thrive. And just as a little note on that, it's also about human behavior. Because the neighborhood that you love, the people that you see every day, you tend to care for. We did try out with urban farming in the midst of Prague, I have to say. In those quarters, there are lots of office buildings, but also some residential. And we actually put forth a bit of an urban farming, a plot, and we thought, this will never work. Because we didn't think the best of people to upkeeping this. But to our surprise and joy, 2 years after, people love this place. They take care about the tools, and they are also taking care about the plants. And it actually works, and that comes back to how you're making sure that buildings are an ecosystem where we all thrive and live and take care for each other.
thank you, Lena.
I would just maybe add super short, because I think you said it all. If we just start with the humans, that's a whole lot easier rather than with systems and ecosystems and big grids. I mean, we just start with the humans, then we get all the answers. It's got to be healthy. It's got to be affordable. It's got to be a nice place to be. You know, it's a place where you have fewer sick days because, you know, there's good ventilation in it. You have better learning because there's actually daylight and other things. So I think we know all the answers, just as long as if our point of departure would always be the humans who somehow relates to the building, spent most of their life within that building one way or the other, then we would get all the answers to what we're kind of looking for if the humans is the point of departure.
Great. So thank you so much to 3 wonderful panelists. Would be lovely to take stock in 2 years' time.
Can you? Thank you very much. And for sure, we will take stock in 1 year, in 2 years. And I would just like to thank you for the excellent examples. I think you all have spoken, whether you wanted or not, to some of these transformation levers, clearly around the data, the whole life carbon, but then also how you as companies use your own purchasing power to change the supplies and work also with your clients. And a clear call also to our regulators and our colleagues in governments that we're starting to outpace you. Now, we have to be careful with that. Maybe not everyone agrees, but clearly forward-looking companies like yours are doing that. And that's why this dialogue is so important. Just a quick word on finance. You are right. We missed finance today in this discussion. Not for lack of wanting, but maybe we didn't find the right person to join us. But I can say that, especially when it comes to some of the levers that are more finance related, we are looking at some very exciting partnering up with, for example, the Urban Land Institute, which is already working on carbon pricing and transition risk. So they will need the work you were speaking to in terms of getting clarity on data, on how to assess, etc., so that they can start pricing it in. And also there are several investor initiatives now that really lean into this question of what do we mean with net zero buildings? You can't tell us today what you mean. So how do we as investors get behind that? So clearly they are also asking to be part of the discussion. And that's why I think this menu of action is so exciting. We really see the interest from different groups. Now, without further ado, I would like to now hand over to our second panel, with apologies that we run a few minutes late. But I look forward to also hearing from you. So Laurie, I give you the floor and you will introduce your panelists. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. All right, it's such an honor to follow the first half and moderate for the second half of our afternoon here. I'm going to actually let everyone introduce themselves as you make your intervention, if that's all right.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm Ryan Kolker, Vice President of Innovation at the International Code Council.
Juan Caballero, Chief of Programs at Build Change, a nonprofit that works in resilient housing across the globe.
Tim Smith, Head of Thought Leadership at the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors.
Wonderful. And I'm Laurie Ferris, an architect, structural engineer, and senior fellow with Architecture 2030. So we're going to, we lost our pillars. Well, we're going to really kind of move from the high-level discussion of these pillars into implementation and the solutions that are available within the built environment now. So I'll briefly introduce, again, kind of drilling down into the details of whole life carbon specifically. So we know that whole life carbon comprises both the embodied carbon and the operational carbon part of a building's life cycle. And while we've seen huge strides around operational emissions in technology, in measurement, and in regulation, we know that embodied carbon is really lagging behind. And at the same time, we know that it's especially critical now for two reasons. The first of which is that it represents about 11% of global emissions, at least at this point. So it has a huge footprint, building materials on their own. And we know that that's likely to actually grow as we plan to double our square footage through the year 2060. And the other reason embodied carbon emissions are so important is because of the time value of carbon, that we know we need to make emissions reductions in the near term. We've heard, the target's 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050 or at the latest, ideally by 2040. And in order to do that, we need to reduce the emissions that are happening now. And because embodied carbon happens mostly up front in a building's life cycle, those are the emissions that we need to really focus on reducing. So we know we've heard about challenges, including lack of alignment and harmonization with data and processes, but we also have a lot of strategies and solutions, which we'll talk about. Circularity, a circular economy, has been touched on as one of the big solutions. Obviously, this ranges of a whole spectrum of strategies, including whole building reuse, which gives us the opportunity to both reduce operational emissions, but also avoid embodied carbon by reducing demand for new materials. And that circular economy goes, from whole building reuse, including also deconstruction and salvage of materials, as well as material recycling. So all of those strategies. And then the second one I want to highlight is the use of biomaterials, natural materials, which kind of flip this narrative and say, what if we can sink carbon into the built environment rather than thinking of the built environment as a consumer of emission or a consumer of energy and an emitter. And both of these strategies have a host of co-benefits as well. So that includes, regenerative forestry and regenerative use of land. It includes retaining and leveraging our built culture and heritage and creating, new workforces trained in these techniques. So a lot of opportunity here. And as a practitioner, I'm really hopeful. I think we've seen a real growth in literacy around life cycle emissions. We've seen a real uptake in the practice of life cycle assessment. And the need we have here, as has been mentioned, is about data and alignment of methodologies and of practices to allow us to really push forth on regulation and policy and to make sure that we're working towards the same goal, as was already described. So I'm going to talk briefly about a tool called the CARE tool, the Carbon Avoided Retrofit Estimator, that I'm a co-developer of with Architecture 2030. And this tool is really responding to the even greater data gap around the avoided emissions of building reuse. While we lack a lot of data and methodology around embodied carbon in general, it's even harder to quantify how many emissions, how much environmental benefit there is in reusing the buildings we already have compared to replacing them. So the CARE tool is a free online tool, and it's meant to kind of quantify this intuitive logic that reusing an existing or historic building that already exists and making it energy efficient is going to have better climate benefits than starting from scratch with new construction, particularly in the near term. So it's a free online tool, and it's meant to give directionally accurate and useful information at the early phases so that it can really be used to inform planning and policy and early owner decisions around really accelerating the reuse of the existing built environment towards a zero emissions future. So that's, I think what we see as the big opportunity is to provide that data, that benchmarking data, this understanding of what are good numbers, what does it look like to reuse a building and have that be a positive contribution towards a net zero future, really making existing buildings an asset rather than a liability. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ryan.
Great. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So ICC is really a solutions provider focused on safety, resilience, and sustainability of buildings. And we primarily do that through codes and standards, but a lot of the support tools that actually make them effective. So the things that underlie the regulations that we've been talking about. And so, we've had a strong focus over the past 50 years on addressing, operational energy use through things like energy codes, but really recognizing the opportunities and the needs to focus on embodied carbon, but also looking at the entire picture across the life cycle of a building. And so we really recognize the need to address that life cycle impact and have a common basis for understanding how to calculate that and then ultimately how to address it. And so working with ASHRAE, American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, we're developing ASHRAE ICC Standard 240, which is for the quantification of life cycle greenhouse gas impacts of buildings, really as an international standard to help drive progress in this space, support the efforts of the building industry, governments, businesses, and the investment community in really having that basis for understanding where we are, where are we going, where we need to go. And certainly pleased to have the participation of many of the folks in this room, folks from Arup, folks from Schneider, from WBCSD, to really bring their knowledge and expertise together into that process to assure that we have the tools, the common basis, and the resources to be able to sort of drive that progress from a common mechanism. We are on a fast track in developing that standard. Our public comment draft should actually be available in January, and would definitely encourage everyone to examine it, provide feedback, so we do capture sort of the best practices of where folks are today, but where we should be heading into the future.
Thank you, Ryan. It's so important to have, again, this common measuring stick, and I'm looking forward to 240 with about as much anticipation as I am to the status report, so it's really exciting. All right, Juan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. So Build Change is a nonprofit that started out helping people build better new houses, mostly, in terms of preventing them from being killed in a disaster, earthquakes, hurricanes, you name it. I want to tell you a little bit about, avoiding new construction is how we got into this. We got mostly for money. In Haiti, after the 2010 earthquake, we were working on rebuilding houses and the allocation to rebuild a new house in Haiti was $3,500. And you decided what to build and what to repair or what to not touch, depending on a tagging system that's common in post-disaster interventions, where you have green tag, yellow tags, and red tags. A lot of houses were red tags. Red tags are houses that were evaluated with enough damage that they needed total replacement. Basically, in car insurance terms, they've been totaled. So we started looking at this, and what you could replace for a house, to replace it with $3,500, you basically had 18 square meters of masonry. No windows, no doors, no electricity, no finishes, just 3x2, 3x3 rooms and a CGI roofing on top. That's what we could give people with that amount of money. And they building it themselves with self-produced construction. And we started looking at a lot of these red tag houses, and we said, look, many of these houses could be actually brought back. They're not that bad. If we had a way of retrofitting them, of improving them without having to demolish and rebuild, a lot of them can be brought back, and the bang per buck is a lot more. We could give people back their own house that they had built originally, that they're happy about, and that house can also be improved so that when the next earthquake comes, when the next hurricane comes, that house will perform better. So that's the money story, right? How to stretch the money. We have been doing that ever since in many places around the world, and more recently, which is why I'm here, we started looking back and started thinking, this not only makes sense from a philosophical standpoint, from a money standpoint, but also from an environment standpoint. As you say, that avoids a lot of process, a lot of construction. And if you do it even before a disaster in a non-damaged house, a damage that's not fit for purpose, when you retrofit it for disaster resistance structurally, but also for quality of life, for ventilation, for lighting, for the many things that people need, even for redensifying, then it makes way more sense. So we started looking back at our projects, and this is not theory, this is not design board. We looked at the houses that we have actually intervened, the ones that we directly built or built in association with close partners, and we looked at about 300 and some houses, Nepal, the Philippines, Colombia, Honduras, many places where we've done this. And going back to the money retrofit story, we also published a study a couple of years ago about the cost of retrofitting, and that, in a very rounded number, retrofitting a house for structure and resilience is about 30% of the cost of replacing it. And that's just the money part of it, the building part of it. In terms of carbon units, which is what we've done now, and we've just published this study. It's online, but I did bring a few of these flyers I can share later. It's also very similar. If you retrofit a house for resilience, you avoid about 70% of the embodied carbon of replacing that house. So that's it. It makes total sense. When you also think that about half of the people on this planet live in an inadequate house today without a disaster, then it makes total sense. Are you going to replace all those houses that are inadequate on the planet today, or is it better to, at least in a big portion of them, retrofit them for multi-purpose objectives? For us, one very important one being disaster resilience, but also energy, habitability, and the rest. So that's what we're about.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, I highly recommend Build Changes reports. They're wonderful, and I love that they highlight that most often climate action can go hand in hand with climate justice, that we can reduce carbon emissions and provide safe and resilient housing for everyone. So thank you. All right, Tim.
Thank you. Yes, so RICS, we, amongst other things, we set standards, and excitingly, in September we launched the second edition of our whole life carbon assessment standard, which is a bit of a groundbreaking in the sense that it provides a clear methodology now for measuring carbon cost across the whole life cycle, which kind of addresses point one of the market transformation area, which is great, and we discussed this back in New York in September. I think the great thing about it is it's not just about our professionals using it, it's about the whole of the built environment professionals using it. We had over 1,500 consultation responses when we developed it, and those are being factored in, so it does speak to ISO, other frameworks from a national, a regional perspective, so it can be used that way. And I just think it gives that, what we need is consistent data that's easily accessible, and this provides that. But I think the challenge for us is, and in our latest sustainability report, only 16% of respondents said that they actually currently are measuring embodied carbon across projects. So the challenge that we have is who's actually leading the demand for this. Like from July, it's going to be mandatory that all professionals will have to use this standard, but they really need the clients and government to say that this is the standard that needs to be used. And I think that's where we need to get to. That's the challenge. It's free to use, so go to our website, rics.org, search it there, you can use it. It's similar to what Ryan's talking about. I think we're just part of that solution. And I just think it's a great opportunity to be here today to share this with you, because we've actually created something tangible that can be used now. So yeah, back to you, Laurie.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so important. I think this piece of empowering practitioners to realize these goals, the targets that we're setting, is so critical. So thank you. I'm going to time check. What do we? Okay, I'm going to start then, and then so I'll get cut off. So in this part of the session, we've really been focused on standards and demonstrations to accelerate implementation, essentially. So how do you see, going back to those 3 pillars, how do you see us working on that first pier, really starting to accelerate transformation across the second 2, thinking about carbon pricing and carbon markets, and how we can further, what? Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah. How we can really, impact carbon markets through these standards and case studies, and then really accelerate the marketplace, the supply and demand in construction.
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece is probably having that standard mechanism to be able to talk consistently about where we are, what are we measuring, what do we care about, and then really drive the conversation forward. Because if we can have tools that can be used across the building industry, but also to support finance and governmental policy that are really going to move things forward, I think that's where we really need to start. I think there's also sort of the piece, and we already talked a little bit about it here, but also the first panel as well, around data and benchmarking. So we need a basis for actually collecting that data and being able to have that comparability across projects, across investment portfolios, those sorts of things.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with Ryan. I just think that it's about that consistency, but it's also about what data are we putting in. Because the results are only as good as the data you put in, and I think we need to get what are we actually measuring, and what are the key bits of data that we need to put in that consistent way. And I think it's great to hear of all the different databases in the UK. We've worked in collaboration with many other organisations to put together the Built Environment Carbon Database, but we have these different ones across the world. We actually need to make sure they're harmonised, so the right data is going in and people can access that. And I think that's a key piece that, if we go to March and we could actually get a discussion going around that, would be brilliant.
Well, for us it was interesting going into this. We had some help from professionals at Autodesk, and we've been also collaborating with the IFC, with EDGE and the resilience of building insights that they're launching. So it was interesting for us to apply these tools to informal sector construction. Sometimes it's kind of like a fuzzy gray thing that nobody really understands, except those that work on it, that cause. And now we've incorporated this in our workflow, like going forward for us and our partners. So it's even more one more piece to convince decision makers that this is something worth investing in and doing at scale.
That's great. I think maybe one of the things I'll add is that with building reuse, part of it is about demonstrating through numbers the value of existing buildings. But I think this has to go hand in hand with the culture shift that was mentioned earlier, that we have to look at what we already have and give it value, not just economic value, but environmental and cultural value as well. And so, we're hoping that the data helps propel that culture shift that we need to see. Do we have how much time? Oh, 10? Oh, plenty of time. Okay. Wonderful. Then I'll ask, how do you think that your work here that we've talked about today strengthens the building's breakthrough and the preparations leading up to the meeting in March?
Yeah, so I can certainly start. going back to sort of that consistency is certainly one piece, but we're actually engaged in leading one of those initiatives that were talked about earlier to help drive progress through things like building codes, but also assuring that we don't just have the codes in place, but we have the tools and the resources to support the folks that are using those tools. So really supporting capacity building. So we have the building capacity for sustainable and resilient buildings, really setting targets for building codes, both on the adaptation side and the mitigation side. So setting targets to meet those 2030 goals that are within the building's breakthrough, but then also supporting the capacity building to actually make them effective. And so having sort of an underlying basis of codes and standards is really a key tool to help drive that forward.
I think for us it's important that the work can shine a light on a whole segment of the building sector that is not necessarily visible and not necessarily well quantified. But even as invisible and not well quantified as it is, it's at least half of the population on the planet. So it's somebody from Habitat for Humanity yesterday was saying at a dinner I was at that that's the largest builder on the planet. Informal sector is the largest builder on the planet, the most active one. It's not waiting for technology to catch up or for market to catch up. So this work applies these types of tools to that sector, which is a huge sector, and I think that's important.
Tim?
I think I've kind of touched on it, but it just helps give visibility and consistency around managing carbon budgets, measuring lifetime emissions, and design choices, and helps governments and clients actually understand what they need from a demand perspective and actually get the advice that they need to actually build net zero, near to or net zero built environment. I think that's the power of the tool. I think the fact is it's quite practical. And it's tangible, and it can be used now. It's not, it requires professionals to do it, but it's there, and it can be used easily.
Yeah, I think that's the theme I'm taking away. This makes me feel hopeful. It feels like we have the standards, the tools, and the demonstration that this is possible now, that we can bring up to leaders to say we know how to do this, and we can really begin to change, I think, radically change our industry. I'd like to open to audience questions if anyone has. Oh, a few. I don't know. Let's start with.
It's not a question. It's only to say that people want to help. We have this, and you can. I don't know how it works, but probably you know how it works, and you can through Roland, through me, or through everybody here around register for interest for this forum. Just before leaving, I just went down.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'll put it at the door.
We've talked a lot about, Joe De Silva from, we've talked a lot about codes and standards. We haven't really talked about other drivers that are going to actually create the demand and other things that governments can do. There are examples of what governments are doing to create the drivers already. In London, they've brought in a law where whole life carbon has to be used for all new planning applications. That's already proving game changing. In Paris, in New York, local law 97 is asking for retrofitting, the owners to retrofit sort of skyscrapers. But we also have to think about who finances buildings, the role of local procurement, but also investors in buildings. And I just wondered, is there anyone from the finance community in this room? Yeah, and I just wanted to point that out, because we talk about being part of a value chain, but we talk about the value chain that we feel comfortable with, from material suppliers through designers to contractors. Very occasionally we get a contractor developer like Skanska in the room, but we don't think about the people who are investing in real estate in cities. And so I feel there's two drivers. There's one which is the cities themselves, And the city, which I'm saying cities because that's where most of the buildings are. So the cities themselves have got net zero targets, and they need to meet their net zero targets in order for governments to meet their national targets. But the other driver is the real estate market and pension funds who are investing in buildings as assets. And that answers the question as to why buildings are seen as separate from infrastructure. They're seen as this asset bank. For investment. And we're not really addressing that. And I think we're not going to solve this unless we can look at it from those two axes. And I was interested whether anyone in the room or on the panel feels the same.
And insurance. We talk about finance a lot, but we don't talk about insurance. I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes, Lena agrees. I think overwhelming agreement that it's a complex and large ecosystem, and we are. I mean, especially we're talking about a very small portion right here. I don't know. I couldn't agree more. If you want to.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. One other sort of piece to the puzzle, and one that we've sort of included in our initiative, is to support the development banks and encourage development banks to work with governments to support the adoption and effective use of codes as part of that tool.
Well, we work mostly with people who are outside of code compliance. So supporting, governments and policymakers are really important in upgrading those existing houses that are outside of code, and to bring them to a better place in terms of efficiency and resilience. So highlighting this issue is really important because, as I said, it's a huge portion of the pie.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the part of the challenge we have is actually we create these standards. It'd be brilliant if they were mandated into legislation and regulation. But I mean, we can work on a local level from a policymaker's perspective. But yeah, that's I couldn't agree more.
All right, so a call for radical collaboration here and getting more of the important stakeholders and decision makers into the room. Yeah. Oh, Vince, yes. Oh.
Thank you. Vincent Martinez, Architecture 2030. I just wanted to build on that. I actually don't think it's about bringing them into this room. I think it's about all of us going into those other rooms. And that's been our strategy this year at COP, is bring practitioners into spaces within nature, within culture. There's so much opportunity here in this room that stays in this room. And so I don't think it's about inviting the finance industry in here. It's about us starting to get out of these rooms from each other and start speaking with them.
Thank you. Okay, final questions, thoughts? Okay.
I just wanted to close, so if anyone has still a question, please go ahead. Because after me, we will be finished.
Okay.
Good?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Laurie, and thank you to the panelists. Maybe just to close this out and Sorry, I was hoping to just give a short closing remark. I didn't mean that we would stop immediately. Maybe Yves Laurent, just coming back to the forum and kind of closing the loop with the beginning. I guess the hope was for this to maybe start a conversation. How can we take this agenda to the forum? I think we have heard examples all across this. And my feeling is we're really at the beginning of the journey. I mean, there's a lot of good things happening. Can we use the forum to really organize this discussion? There's a lot of things happening here and there. We've seen a lot of great examples. Can we really leverage the forum for that? And maybe that takes a bit of work for us to say we could have, really discussions across these where we bring together these different groups. And I think the other thing that would be great at the forum, we've heard so many good stories of what is that future for the built environment, and we're already working on it. We've heard so many examples. We really need to bring that to the forum as well, so that we can show that things are happening. And maybe just quickly on the topic of finance, I completely agree, Joe. And I mentioned before that we don't have them here, but they are part of our journey. We are working with several networks that bring together real estate and investors, because as you said, they're one of the two key demand levers. And especially investors are starting to lean into this topic as well. They want to understand what is a net zero aligned building because they have committed themselves. So I think it's really now the time, and maybe you're right, we need to go to them, not just say you have to be here, because ultimately, yeah, whether buildings or infrastructure or not, they're part of our life. And that is, and they undergo a process to be created where we are all a part of. So maybe just, yeah, to close, and for us, do you want to share a couple thoughts yourself? How we could maybe use this really to help us in the forum? Thank you.
Yeah, just to say that we have a process to get there to Paris. We are starting workshops on different sessions. So we have 20 titles of sessions, which is quite a lot. Topics. One of them is private finance, the other is development finance, the other one is the role of local authorities, urban solutions. There's lots of housing, how do we finance housing, sustainable housing, lots of topics. So I know exactly how we can register or how we can, by now, you go to this website, there will be a line to declare interest, and then we'll get in touch with you. But definitely, it's the way it's going to. We have now. It's next year, so Emmanuel says it's a long time. Next year, in March. But I personally feel pressure. But maybe I'm wrong. So it's. I mean, we need to organize that, and so we are working on that. Yeah. So the way is this way. We are going to organize workshops to be able, so that the sessions that will take place on the 7th of March will be really an achievements of the work that will be done until then. So this is what we're doing, and if you want to participate as organization, definitely you can register in some way. We'll find a way.
Well, thank you very much for having joined us here, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the COP. Thank you.